Hi everyone, this is Counseling 4480, Osborn Chapter 6, Interest Inventories. When it comes to interest, these are the kind of questions that we want to know, which is, what do you like to do? What do you hate doing? What do you do for fun? How do you spend your free time? And if you could be doing anything right now, what would it be? So you can see we're going to try to gauge what kind of interests that you have. Strong pioneered the development of the interest inventory, and Strong is someone that we've talked about plenty of times in the semester. He gathered data concerning people's likes and dislikes for a variety of activities, objects, and types of persons commonly encountered. Found that people in different occupations have common patterns of interest that differentiate them from people in other occupations. So what that is saying is, he met up with a bunch of video game players, let's say, right? And then he had them take their interest test, and then there might be a common theme that pops up with them. So then whenever another person, let's say a future student, takes an interest inventory and they score sign it similar, they might actually be, it might actually be successful for them to maybe consider becoming a video game person or whatever it is. And that's why when you take your own interest inventories as an assignment for this class, you'll notice that some of those things will pop up as a professional career major in a school or something, and that's why we want you to explore those things. Does it mean that you always going to do what you are interested in when it comes to work? Definitely not. Some of us do work that we know is awful or boring or whatever, but it gives us the money to do the things that we want to do for fun, our own interests. And so that could be the way that it influences you as well. So Rye-Sec theory is a well-known theory for examining interests in John Holland's Rye-Sec theory. So it is, again, I just want to re-emphasize, this is the most well-known theory for examining interests. It's called Rye-Sec. So the assumption, number one, is that personality can be classified into 6 distinct types. And those 6 distinct types are Rye-Sec. Rye-Sec stands for realistic, investigative, artistic, social, enterprising, or conventional. Okay, and in the illustration here, I just want to maybe give you an additional mini definition of each of those so that you understand what that means. So a person who's realistic is a person who's going to do something. Investigative are people who think. Artistic are people who actually like to create. Socials are people who like to help. Enterprising people like to persuade people to do things. And then conventional are people who like organization. So you might have associated yourself with some of them or felt more identified with some of those, and that's fantastic. Usually when you take this test or one of the tests that uses the Rye-Sec theory, then you can actually find out what your 3 letters are. So assumption number 2 is that there are 6 types of environments that share the same characteristics. So what that is saying is, when you take your test, the Rye-Sec test, you're going to get 3 letters that are the highest performing scores. In all jobs, there are also 3 of those letters as well. So the first one was that all people have 3 letters. The second assumption is that all jobs have 3 letters as well. Assumption number 3 is that people are most satisfied in the environment when their 3-letter personality code derived from their interests and skills matches that of the environment in which they are engaging. So they say that if your 3 letters, let's say your 3 letters are RIA, and your job that you're thinking about applying to is also RIA, that most likely you're going to be a good match. Assumption number 4 is that certain predictions can be made about the outcome of a certain personality combining with a certain environment. So they're saying now assumption number 4 is if we know that those 2 things meet up, we're more likely to be able to predict certain things or understand how things are going to work there. So overall, achievement of a fit between a person and an environment would be ideal. So let's talk a little bit about the different parts of Rye-Sec so that you really can understand that a little bit even more. All right, realistic. Sample occupations for realistic would be a carpenter, an engineer, a veterinarian, a welder, or a rancher. And the interests are hands-on activities, outdoors, mechanical, athletic, and working with things. Hobbies. They might like fishing, camping, sports, and mechanics. And then preferred work environments are usually outdoors or rural areas. And again, this is just a small sample. It could be a little bit different for you, and you might still score really high on realistic. Investigative sample occupations are a biologist, mathematician, psychologist, or pharmacist. The interest would be science, math, abstract tasks. Abstract tasks are kind of tasks that are not necessarily pick this up or something like that. It's more like, think about how this would affect something else, because that's not something you can, physically see or anything, but you have to think about it in your mind. Concepts, problem solving, and then working independently. Hobbies include collecting data, conducting research, and analyzing data. Preferred work environments usually are office settings such as a laboratory. Artistic. Um, Sample occupations are artists, music teacher, photographer, or interior designer. The interests are people who are interested in aesthetics. Aesthetic is like quality of beauty or quality of good looks and stuff like that. Self-expression, creating original works and using your imagination. Hobbies include creating, composing, and designing while working independently. Preferred work environments are museums, theaters, galleries, and then of course concert halls. Social is, for example, for sample occupations, is a teacher, a guidance counselor, social worker, juvenile probation officer. Interests are helping people with their problems, teaching, working with people. Hobbies are informing, teaching, coaching, and leading discussions. And preferred work environments are social service agencies, schools, religious establishments, and personnel office. So most of you guys in this class are working in the field. And if you guys took a RISEC theory-based assessment, most likely an S would be a really high score for you guys because you're working in rehab counseling, education, special ed, nursing, again, probation, criminal justice, all those things, right? And we just saw in the social, all those things are really common. So most likely all of you guys would be scoring a high in an S. Enterprising is corporate executive, sales manager, public official, computer salesperson, or stockbroker. Interests include leading, persuading, politics, influencing other people, making money. Hobbies would be selling, managing, giving speeches, lending groups of people or leading groups of people. And then preferred work environments would be marketing agencies, investment banking firms, retail and wholesale firms, and then of course small businesses. Conventional sample occupations would be bookkeeper, accountant, secretary, cashier, and banker. And as we talked about before, the interest would be people who like to organize, people who like routines, and then meeting clear standards. Hobbies would be keeping records, scheduling, maintaining adoptive procedures of an organization, and preferred work environments would be large corporations, business offices, and again, accounting firms. Stability of interests. Studies consistently show that interests are incredibly stable over long periods of time. So usually what you're interested in is going to remain the same if you're in high school as when you get older. However, for some people, interests do change dramatically over time. There are unknown reasons. Maybe they were never exposed to it, so they didn't realize that they were interested in it until later on. But there are many reasons why. But overall, if you're interested in something, usually you kind of stay with that for the rest of your life. Interest stability appears to increase with age. So you really then start, once you get to have specific interests, you might get them really like that's all you really want to do. Like let's say that you really love art gallery shows, right? When you were younger, you might go to one or two art gallery shows, but as you get older and your time is more valuable, you're going to say, I don't want to go to that beach party. I'd rather go to an art show instead. So that's what they're saying when it comes to more increase with age. Attempts to predict who will have stable interest scores is not consistent. Okay, so we don't know why some people will change some of the stuff and some people don't. After a certain age, interests tend to stay the same, but may be more clarified or narrowed down, like we just said in the prior. Interpreting interest inventories. So there are many ways that you can actually have the dialogue with your clients. The first one is client-led interpretation. Obviously, that means that the client will be talking first or more at the beginning, okay? So the counselor will give the client a copy of the results prior to the session with limited instructions. So you might say something like, here is a report generated by the inventory you completed. Why don't you take a few minutes and look at it over before we begin? And then you might say something like, what did you learn from the report? And then listen to what the client brings up and use that as the lead on what is important to the client. Because they're going to say, well, I noticed this, and I thought that was really interesting, and I thought that this was really accurate. And then you write these notes down as you're talking to them. And then you go, oh, okay, well, let's talk about these things that you found important from your test results. And then you can go from there. The second way is counselor-led interpretation, and again, that means that the counselor is going to really take the lead on this, but obviously there's still going to be some conversations. So counselor starts the session with a statement, here's a report generated by the inventory you completed. The first section of the report states the purpose of the inventory, which was to identify occupations that relate back to your interests. And then you're going to go through and describe each section in a linear fashion, which basically means in order, and stopping if the client had questions or comments about what you're talking about. Make sense? The third way is a collaborative interpretation, which is, basically a combination. The combination of the first two approaches and actively involves the client in each step of the interpretation. Okay, you might do something linear like saying, well, I noticed that this is the first section, and what did you think about the results when you saw those things? And then you can say, well, the purpose of the first section was to do this, and that's what it seems like you are telling me, right? And then you go to the next section, and then you have them interpret it. So it's a combination. So it's a little bit less formal, less structured because of that, but there is some structure to it because you're doing it in a linear fashion, let's say. Okay, now we're going to interpret two different types that can happen with your clients where it might be a little bit more challenging for you as a beginner to understand why someone would get a score like this. So the first example is called a flat depressed profile. Depressed doesn't mean sad in this situation, it means low, okay? So a flat low profile. Flat basically means it kind of goes across the board, the same kind of, right? And it doesn't look like, let's say, a mountain or anything like that. So when someone has a flat depressed profile, that means that the narrow interest range and individuals with highly defined interests. So what that means is that usually when that happens is that they only like one specific thing and that's it. And that's why you'll see a little bit more than all the others, but overall, they're just not interested in a lot of things. A client with little knowledge about the world of work and the workplace. So if they don't really understand what kind of qualities it is required to be successful at a job, or any qualities that you need to have at a job. And so their scores are all going to be low because they just don't realize that, oh, I need to, like this, or I should like these things if I want to work in a specific place. The person might be having a mood swing when they were taking the assessment. A person who really just doesn't know what's going on. So a person who might be very sheltered in their lives, like they haven't done anything with their lives yet. So they're like, I don't really know what I'm supposed, I like or don't like. I haven't really done much yet. And then, of course, another person would be an unwillingness to work, which are people who just don't want to do anything. They don't care. They don't want to do anything. Nothing interests them because they don't want to do anything. And so that might be another reason why you might have a very low flat profile. Okay. And so what happens is because it could be any of these things, for something like this, you might want to have the client start off the conversation so that you can sort of get to know which one of those things is really is for this specific situation. Okay, let's talk about the opposite of that, which is a flat elevated profile. So a flat elevated profile is very similar to a flat depressed profile, except for everything is really high. The scores on all of them are really high. So individuals who are reluctant to say dislike or indifferent to items. So when they're taking the interest inventory, what's happening is they say, I like to go outdoors. And they say, I like that. I like to be indoors. Oh, I like that too. And then, so everything is they like everything. And so then that means that everything, the score is going to be very high. And the reason why would be maybe they have a wide diversity of interests. Clients who are multi-potential or gifted in many areas. So maybe they really do have a lot of fun doing all these different types of things. And I think that sometimes you find this more common with older test takers than younger test takers because people who are older tend to have more experience in life. And so they can really base, their opinions and stuff like that. And they might like a little bit of everything. And that's totally fine as well. Clients with a great deal of experience, like we just said, they might be a little bit older with experience. And then, of course, clients who have an inflated view of the self. So what that is saying is people who think that they're good at everything. I'm sure you know someone who's like that. Maybe you're that person. But what happens with that is if you think that you're good at everything, your score is going to say that you're good at everything, right? And so, again, if you get something like that, which is totally fine, you want to have the conversation start out by the client. And then from there, you will kind of figure out which one of those things they kind of fall into. And then you can have that conversation from that way. All right, here are some examples of specific interest inventories. The Campbell Interest and Skills Inventory, CISS, measures self-reported vocational interests and skills that provide estimates of an individual's confidence in their ability to perform various occupational activities. There's also the Career Decision Making Revised, CDMR. The self-scored and internet editions is a comprehensive and multidimensional system approach to career decision making that uses an individual's self-knowledge of interests, stated career choices, work values, and future training plans to suggest career options for further exploration. The Cooter Career Interest Assessment, the KCIA 32, is to match an individual's interest in the RISEC areas to ONET occupations. There's 16 national career clusters and pathways. The self-directed search, the SDS, will determine a person's three-letter Holland code to help find the occupations, the field, and fields of study that match well with their interests and personality. And then there's also the strong interest inventory, the SII, to help clients identify, understand, and expand career options based on the interests in occupation, work activities, leisure activities, and school subjects. And then the last part is the interest inventories for people with disabilities, because sometimes people with disabilities not be able to write or type something in. So then a different type of test might be needed for those clients. The first one is called the PIC-DV 2000, which requires no reading because it's all picture-based. There's also the Reading Free Vocational Interest Inventory, or the FVII2. It's a non-reading vocational preference inventory for use with individuals with cognitive disabilities, learning disabilities, and disadvantage and regular classroom students. And I just want to say one last thing about the interest section here. When you do an interest inventory, you can totally, skew it on purpose or basically manipulate it very easily. I'll give you an example. When I was young, my mom said, hey, you're going to become a doctor. So when the first time I took an interest inventories, I purposely marked high on all the science and all the helping and stuff like that. And then I purposely marked low all the other things. And obviously when I got my results back, they said, wow, you should become a doctor or a scientist or a psychologist. And although I did that on purpose, it doesn't really show your true interest. And so then, if you're not honest with yourself or open to be honest like this and then really explore things, maybe even be vulnerable, it doesn't really help. And this is why something like this or any other assessment as well, if you're trying to impress other people, you can manipulate it, but you have to think about why you're manipulating it. And you need to figure out whether or not you want to be honest with yourself, and then, talk openly about it. You can still become a doctor if you want to, right? But when it comes to an interest inventory, you have to really answer these questions honestly to really explore what maybe your strengths are or your areas of interest are, because that can also show where you're going to be very successful, because those are areas that you are happy doing.